All right, we pretty much now have the full results for the elections that occurred on Wednesday in the Netherlands. These were snap elections that were called after the collapse of the former government, which was elected after the 2023 elections. And those elections themselves were also snap elections after the collapse of the government that was elected originally in 2021. And so what you had happen was the Mark Rutte government, which has served for several terms, was reelected in 2021 under a coalition of various liberal, center-left, center-right parties. That government collapsed over migration issue. And then in the 2023 elections, we had a shock victory from Geert Wilders' Party for Freedom, which came out on top. And then you had a more right-wing populist, kind of center-right government being formed by some of the former parties of the Mark Rutte government. Of course, Mark Rutte himself had resigned from politics, but also the right-wing populist Party for Freedom under Geert Wilders, which had been, until then, kind of excluded from the political mainstream. That government has also collapsed. There was divisions within the different parties also on migration. You had the Party for Freedom withdraw and then the new social contract also. And so there were snap elections held, of course, 2 years early. And then, like I said, the 2021 election was held. That was held a full 4 years, full term after the 2017 elections. But then there was a 2 year early elections held in 23, and then obviously the full term would have been until 27, but we've had early elections yet again. And part of the reason we've had this happen so many times is because Dutch politics has become increasingly fragmented. Now, the Dutch parliament does not have an electoral threshold similar to Germany, and so that means you only need around 0.67% of the vote to win a seat. That is the number for 1 out of 150. And so if a party wins enough votes to win one seat, they win that one seat. There's no 5% threshold in Germany or some countries that prevents minor parties from getting a few seats. And so for this reason, we have a ton of parties in the Dutch parliament. And also the Dutch electorate shifts a lot more than any other country I've seen. In the 2017 federal elections, the VVD won. The 2019 provincial elections, we actually had the Forum for Democracy win. And then in 2021, the VVD won again. And the 2023 elections for the states, you had the Farmer Citizen Movement win, then the PVV, and now D66 has won. And what this means is that we have had 5 different political parties be the largest party in the Netherlands over a period of just 4 years, which definitely shows how kind of dynamic and rapidly changing the electorate in this country is. And you even have political parties that are very similar. For example, you have D66 and the Party for Freedom and Democracy, which are both liberal, but one's considered more left-wing liberal, more right-wing liberal. You have 3 right-wing populist parties. You have a Party for the Animals, also the Green Party. And then you have various of the Christian political parties, the Christian Democratic Appeal, which is considered more moderate, the Reform Political Party, which is more Calvinist, a kind of more radical Christian political party. And so, forming coalition governments in the Netherlands is increasingly very difficult, and this is why you've had these early snap elections. But I want to take a look at the overall results. So we had a kind of not necessarily a surprise victory for D66, because D66, the Party for Freedom, the VVD, and the Green Left Labour Party were all polling neck and neck. And so this was a four-way race in the polls up until the election day. But in the end, Democrats 66, the kind of liberal but maybe more left-wing liberal political party, came out on top, winning 16.89% of the vote, nearly tied with the Party for Freedom of Geert Wilders, but they did win the most votes in the country. And so we'll theoretically have the kind of mandate to put forward the next government. They won 26 seats, which is up 17 from the last election. They did well in 2021, but in 2023 they lost a lot of support. But they have managed to gain that, and this is their best result ever. But however, despite the fact that this is D66's best result, this is, I believe, the worst result of the largest party, meaning that the party that was the biggest at a Dutch federal election or Dutch general election had the lowest amount of the vote, which is at 16%, being the largest party. Of course, in the German federal elections, we had the CDU at 28% and the AfD at 20%. But here, D66 is only at 16.89, but still are the largest party. The Party for Freedom under Geert Wilders won 16.75. They came in a strong second place with 26 seats, the same as D66, but a loss of 11 seats. So definitely down from their major victory in the 2023 election, but are still a major force in Dutch politics. The party of the former Prime Minister Mark Rutte, the Party for Freedom and Democracy, the VVD, won 14%, a small loss in support, but nothing too significant. The kind of biggest loser of the night was the merged party of the Green Left and the PVDA, which is the Workers' Party. These two political parties were separate until, I believe, 2023, where they started kind of competing on the same electoral list. and they came in fourth place with around 12.6% of the vote, losing 5 seats. They were expected in some polls earlier this month and before to even become the largest party after this election. However, they failed to reach that goal and ended up coming in fourth place with some losses from the previous election. And this is also kind of difficult considering the fact that they are two parties. They brought together the Greens, which has somewhat of a different appeal from the Labour Party, but even with that, they have struggled to kind of break through consistently. They did well in the European Parliament elections, but here they definitely fell behind. The Christian Democratic Appeal managed a big comeback, winning 11.79% of the vote, and the main reason this happened was because the new social contract, which was kind of considered a splinter group, a breakaway from Christian Democratic Appeal, lost all of their seats. They didn't really contest this election as much. Peter Omtzigt was a former part of the leader of that party, which was a part of the former coalition government. He had withdrawn, and since most of their votes and support has drawn away, a lot of it has gone back to the CDA, the Christian Democratic Appeal. And you also had some movement on the right. Now, Geert Wilders' Party for Freedom did lose a lot of support, around, I believe, 7% percentage points, and of course 11 seats. But you also had two different right-wing political parties that gained, arguably to the right, or maybe more moderate than Wilders. There's the Forum for Democracy, and then there's JA, or Right Answer 21, which split away from the Forum for Democracy. Now, JA 21 gained 8 seats, winning around 6% of the vote, and the Forum for Democracy doubled its support, winning around 4.5% and gaining 7 seats. And so we see here, between these two parties, there's a total of 12 seats gained and then 11 lost for the Party for Freedom. And so that means that the right-wing populist, or far right, or right-wing bloc, whatever you want to call it, in the Netherlands, has basically held its own with the amount of support and seats it has. But there is a shift. Of course, the Party for Freedom is in the Patriots for Europe group with Marine Le Pen's National Rally, Viktor Orban's Fidesz. JA21 is in the ECR with the Polish Law and Justice Party, Giorgia Meloni's Fratelli d'Italia, and then Forum for Democracy is in the ESN group with Germany's Alternative for Germany. So even though they're all right-wing, they are different and aligned on certain different interests. The Party for Freedom has long focused on immigration, whereas Forum for Democracy initially started as a more a party critical of the European Union and focused on bigger economic issues. So we do overall see a shift in the right-wing populist camp in the country. The Farmer Citizen Movement lost some support, and then you have kind of different smaller parties, all with around 1 to 3 seats. So that's it for the overall results, and I want to quickly look at the possibility of forming a coalition. And the reality is this is going to be extremely difficult. Now, if we take a look, of course, the previous government, which included the PVV, the VVD, the CDA, and then the BBB, the Farmer Citizen Movement, and then the new social contract, they are at 52. They are well below a majority. So that, of course, is, even if they had a majority, it would be unlikely that they would form a coalition because they did collapse. And so I want to go through some of the possible options. Now, we have the coalition that was in power in 2021 under Mark Rutte, which was D66, VVD, CDA, and the ChristenUnie, the CU party. They do not have a majority. This was somewhat of a stable government. Well, I say stable, it wasn't because it eventually collapsed, but it was a government that made sense on paper. It was a kind of liberal, it was a government that consisted of the liberal right and the liberal left. It was a broad centrist coalition, but they do not have a majority. So they're going to have to either go to the left or to the right. Now, of course, in this coalition, now that D66 is the largest party, they would most likely put forward Rob Yetten, their leader, as prime minister. However, like I said, he has to find a majority. Now, he could go to the right. A lot of these parties have ruled out working with Geert Wilders' PVV and also the Forum for Democracy, but JA21 might be a possibility for working with the VVD or the CDA. However, I don't see a Eurosceptic party like JA21 being able to work with D66. So if you add them, you'd have to take out D66. So I think there's pretty much two options we have here. Let's say that the parties agree to work with the right-wing populist parties. We could have a kind of continuation of the former coalition with the Party for Freedom, JA21. I think the Forum for Democracy is still considered too controversial. I don't see them being in the government. We could have the VVD, the CDA, and maybe the CU, so I think this would be a broad right-wing government. Now, like I said, this is not at all guaranteed to happen because the PVV and JA21 are still considered maybe too right for some of these parties. The VVD did work with the PVV, of course, in the previous election, but the CDA is not, and they might decide not to do this. This would be a logical government because it is a kind of broad right wing. It's the center to the kind of far right, covering the entire right wing of the Dutch political spectrum. It does have a majority, but like I said, they're going to have to work around certain issues. The other option would be to go to the left, and that's having all of the kind of liberal parties and then maybe go if you go to the left, you'd have to go to the Labor Party. Now, D66 I think could work with the right-wing liberals, or maybe the Christian Democrats, but also the people on the left, the Labor Party and the Greens. However, same thing is if you add JA21 or the PVV, you'd have to take out D66. I think if you were to add the Labor Party or the Green Labor Party, I think you might have to take out the VVD, which has become increasingly right-wing over the past several years, and then you're below a majority. And so I think the reality is that there is no easy working majority. And if I had to put forward my predictions, I don't think any government is going to last 4 years. I don't think this parliament's going to last 4 years. I think we're going to see snap elections in another 2 years. I think one of either two things is going to happen. We're going to either have a minority government led by Rob Yetton and some of the more liberal centrist parties, something like this, tolerated by some of the other parties, or we're going to see a break between, or rather, further cooperation between the right, the center, and the right and the far right, and maybe see a coalition between the VVD, PVV, CDA, J21, and CU. So I think that on paper, it's either going to be this or a minority government with Rob Yetton as prime minister. But I don't think either of those are an easy pathway to a majority, and there's also problems with that. But like I said, there have been parties that have ruled out working with the PVV that after the 2023 elections kind of changed, and so I think that regardless of what parties' promises are now, I think the math is going to force a lot of coalition talks that might have been formerly excluded. But of course, once we get more information on that, it's been the first few days, so there's not too much news on that. But once we get kind of news of the coalition talks and everything, I would of course give an update on that. But I wanted to just give a general overview of the results as we have them now. And that's going to be it for this video. I hope everyone liked it. If you do, please like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thank you for watching.